I have to tell you a little story to get us started today. My sister, before she got married, when she was still living at my parents' house, had a collection of stuffed animals like you would not believe. It took up the whole corner of her bedroom. And my dad had gotten these two cats, Brutus and Muffin. And they were like Blue Point.
I thought it was Marie.
They were Blue Point, like Burmese. They weren't Siamese, they were like Burmese, right? And Bruce was my dad's cat, and Muffin was my grandmother's cat.
Oh.
And he was a sweet cat, but he was a funny looking cat. I mean, he had kind of, his nose was kind of big and wide, and he had super crossed eyes, right? But just a funny cat. I mean, he was one of those cats, usually you spray him with water and they run away. He would let you drench him. He was the weirdest thing. I mean, he was just so different. But a really sweet cat. I really liked him. But one day I was there hanging out. I think you were there probably too. But we couldn't find Muffin, and we were looking all over the house for Muffin. Couldn't find him anywhere. And he usually would come when you call him. And so I just happened to be up looking around upstairs at my parents' house, and I stuck my head in my sister's room. You don't have to stay there long, you know. I don't want to be in there. But I just kind of glanced over at the big pile of stuffed animals and just kind of looked away. What
Muffin was
what?
it?
And you know, see all the Disney characters and all the different things. And in the midst of all of these stuffed animals was this little different head that I had not expected to see. And he was usually, if he came in, he'd be like, meow, meow, you know, come up to see and stuff. He was totally trying to like blend in with all the stuffed animals. And it was so funny. I cracked up laughing, you know. I was like, you're busted. You got to get out of there. Why did I bring this goofy story up? Well, you know, while all those stuffed animals are cute and well designed and everything, they were all absolutely lifeless.
Mm-hmm.
But in the midst of that, there was something that was different. That cat. And while he maybe wasn't as well designed to the discriminating eye, because he was a little odd looking, he was the only thing that had life in the midst of all of that lifelessness. And folks, lots of times we are the life in the midst of lifelessness. And Jesus talks about that in this little passage that follows up Matthew's account of the Beatitudes. So we're going to look at 13 through 16 of the verses today. Matthew 5, 13 through 16. We're going to talk about our difference. Let me read these verses to you. And these should be very, very familiar if you spend any time in the Word of God. And then we'll kind of break it down a little bit. Jesus says, "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." Quite frankly, what he says here in these first three verses of this passage is we're supposed to be different. If you're a follower of Jesus Christ, you're supposed to be different. So Jesus uses a couple of comparators. Number one, he says that believers should be salt. And when he says, just reading it the way we are, you are the salt of the earth. Let me read it the way Jesus would have said it in English if he had spoken in English. He would say, you are the salt of the earth. And even more so, you're salt, they're not. That's what he was trying to get across to them, is that you are, by the very definition of who you are, different than other people. You know, salt is, if you go out there and start reading commentaries on this, there's just volumes and volumes written on the entire Sermon on the Mount. But if you get into reading what scholars say about salt, you know, salt can be used for a lot of different things in our world. But in Jesus' day, the primary use was for preservatives. Yeah, it was a preservative because they didn't have refrigeration and so forth and so on. And if you didn't salt your meat, it was going to go bad pretty quickly. So he was calling us salt. He was saying that believers are here in society to keep it from becoming completely rotten and corrupt. That is our place in society. Might I say also, the Holy Spirit, in and of his own ministry, as well as through us, has that. You know, and there's later in Scripture, you hear about the fact that once he's taken away, then pretty much everything's going to come at it great guns. But that's another discussion for another day. He says that we're the salt of the earth. And I don't want to draw too much of a distinction, because he says salt of the earth and light of the world. And earth and world are pretty darn close in their use in the Bible. But just think about the earth being the material things in our society. And so it might have been a little different in Jesus' day, but let's suffice it to say that people of every generation have been pretty caught up in material possessions and earthly preoccupations, if you will. Sure. And so, but Jesus expects us to be different. But just my observation, for what it's worth, I believe that Christians in our world today have become, for the most part, pretty much caught up in the world, to the point that it's invaded in at every point. And I don't know that we are that different from the world, and we probably don't appear very different from the world. And that's the logic behind this idea of salt losing its flavor. Maybe if you're a chemist, that will make no sense to you, right? I mean, salt is sodium chloride, right? I mean, it's a molecule. You can't change that. It's a molecule. So what does he mean by that? Where did they get their salt in Jesus' day? They got it out of the lakes. They got it out of the seas, right? There were impurities in that. And even to the point that sometimes there was dirt and other things mixed with it. Where the only way that you're going to make salt lose its flavor is by mixing it with something else, is the point that Jesus was making. If you take that pure salt, but you keep putting in, dirt, or even if you said salt and then you put in some oregano and you put in some other spices, eventually that salt starts to become less and less effective. Certainly as a preservative, but also just from a flavoring perspective, as Jesus talks about. So you can get to a point, you put enough stuff in the salt, and it's really useless for what its purpose is. And Jesus says at that point, just let's just use it for road covering, because that's what it's going to be good for. And so that's the point that he's making to us, is we can become so diluted by everything in the world that our saltiness becomes ineffective. And so people of his day would have understood that right away. We have to kind of explain it out, because we don't normally dilute our salt. You can go over there to the shaker and it's going to be pretty salty when you shake it out. But I want you to think about salt is what we do. That includes how we conduct ourselves, what we value, how we serve others, and how we practically and relationally present our faith to a culture that's becoming more and more dysfunctional. I don't know if you've noticed that, but our culture is pretty darn dysfunctional. And we've gotten to the point now, I think, even where we kind of celebrate dysfunction based on the number of TV programs that seem to, I don't know where they find these people sometimes, but who makes those phone calls and says, "Hi, is there anything going on in your family that you would like to put on national television?" It's just the craziest thing. Yeah. But there you go. Salting this earth means showing the love of Christ, being compassionate with others, not offering judgment and ridicule, which seems to be a difficult thing as well, offering a coat or a blanket when someone's cold, or just simply being there when somebody's hurting. I mean, all those things, and that's a short list. I mean, the list is as long as humanity, for what it's worth. But I was thinking about all of this as I was preparing today, and I was reminded of a song that Stephen Curtis Chapman wrote a long, long time ago, and I wish I could sing it. He's just way better at it than I am. So what I thought I'd do, I want to show you this video. Okay, it's just about 3-4 minutes. And then I'm going to read the words to you, because you may not catch all the words. But it's I believe this song is a challenge to us to be salt and light. It's called The Change. Anybody familiar with this song? You ever heard it? Okay. I'm going to show. I just, let me read you these words. It's kind of hard to hear on that. Well, I got myself a t-shirt that says what I believe. I got letters on my bracelet to serve as my ID. I got the necklace and the keychain and almost everything a good Christian needs. I got the little Bible magnet on my refrigerator door and a welcome mat to bless you before you walk across my floor. I got a Jesus bumper sticker and the outline of a fish stuck on my car, and even though the stuff's all well and good, I cannot help but ask myself, what about the change? What about the difference? What about the grace? What about forgiveness? What about a life that's showing I'm undergoing the change? Then he continues, well, I've got this way of thinking that comes so naturally where I believe the whole world is revolving around me. And I got this way of living that I have to die to every single day, because if God's Spirit lives inside of me, I'm going to live life differently. I'm going to have the change. I'm going to have the difference. I'm going to have the grace. I'm going to have forgiveness. I'm going to live a life that's showing I'm undergoing the change. That's strong. Now, just one disclaimer on that video. That's not him. He didn't put that together. Somebody else did. Some of those images were from Westboro Baptist Church, and that ain't Christian. Never was, never will be. So those people that visit around different places and go out there and say God hates this and hates that and hates the other thing, that ain't a Christian church. I don't know what they are, but they're not Christian. But that's a challenge to me, because we can be culturally Christian. We can have all the trappings of Christianity and show nothing that is Jesus, really, to people. And we live in this area is really Christian culture area, right? I mean, there's churches everywhere. There's church people everywhere, right? But, and not even but, I don't know those churches. I don't know those people. I don't know their hearts. But you can get so saturated in Christian culture that you miss the Jesus part, which is kind of the whole point that Stephen Curtis Chapman is saying. We can do all this stuff and we all nod our heads because we're all in a club, but is there a difference from the real world? That's the question. That's the challenge. That's what Jesus is saying. He says, you're the light of the world, or the salt of the earth. You got to be different than the rest of the world. So let me pause there. Comments, questions? Am I off in the weeds? Are you guys kind of with me on this? Or are we? So you're looking really serious.
I'm just thinking about it,
Okay.
How are we different, and are we really different? And,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's continue. Because that we may not get the answer to that today, but I think we got to start to ask ourselves, how am I?
Yeah, in actions, in words, in deeds.
Mm-hmm. All the above. Of course, it starts, we're going to get to this in a little bit with Jesus, right? It's like, people do so much to kind of adjust the outside. Jesus was all over the Jewish leaders. Maybe we've talked about this recently. About, you guys clean the cup, but the inside of the cup is still filthy. We can do all the cleanup on the outside, but it's got to start from the inside out, which is kind of the challenge, right?
A lot of people do these great works too.
Yeah.
That Jesus sees as dirty rags.
Yeah, right.
They're feeding the hungry and they're doing great things in our eyes, but Jesus sees it as their good works as dirty rags. Not that they shouldn't be doing it, but if they don't know the Lord, they're not, they're not giving people Jesus. It's what's the worth,
What did you say? Good. They're doing good, but
They're doing good, but he doesn't consider it.
dirty rag, is that what?
Well, yeah, there's a verse that says, your good works are like dirty rags. And,
Okay.
And, it's an Old Testament thing, so they're talking about menstrual rags, actually.
Right.
That's what they're talking about.
Okay.
Yeah, Isaiah, we actually touched on that last week. Yeah, Isaiah. All the good that you do, everything you do is filth if it doesn't start with Jesus.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's got to start with him.
Right.
And, well, I'm not gonna give you any more commentary on that right now.
I'll say one thing about salt too. That
Please.
You never hear the expression that he's not worth his salt?
Yes.
That came out of the Roman era also, because salt was used as pay.
Oh,
It
yeah,
says,
right.
You're not worth your salt. The soldiers were getting paid in salt, and that's what
Yeah.
that's. So it was also not a preservative,
Wow.
but it was paid for the soldiers, yeah.
Shows how much importance it had, right? So maybe Jesus folks would have known about that at that
They would have
day.
known it, yeah, they would have known
right.
exactly what he was talking
Yeah.
about.
yeah. Well, I want you to think about, as I said, I want you to think about salt as what we do. But let's think about the second part that he says, you're the light of the world. And this is really why we do it in many ways. Again, he said, just like you're salt, they're not. He's also saying, you're light. They're not light, you're light. He's making sure, he's trying to draw a line here and say, you should be different. Well, I'm going to get kind of basic. If you don't have light, what do you have?
Darkness.
Darkness, right? And have you guys, I'm sure all of it, we've been around this world long enough to know, you can be out in the pitch black, and it takes very, very little light to start to illuminate.
It's true.
Right? I mean, that little light that's on your phone, it's amazing how much light it can produce, right? But there's another thing to it too, is you can't hide light in the darkness, and that's what Jesus is getting at. He says, if there's a city on a hill, you're not, it's not going to be hidden.
Right.
And I thought about that. There's a lot of been different translations about this, because he says, a city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Think about, in our day, how at night you can see the glow from Jacksonville,
Yes, you can.
right? I mean, you could see it at night.
Mhm.
Even in Jesus' day, in the evening, a city like Jerusalem, which was a city set on a hill, when you were ways off from Jerusalem, even just with the candlelight and the torches burning, you could have seen Jerusalem from far off, as long as it wasn't blocked by a mountain. And so that's the idea that cities should glow at night, and believers should be glowing in the darkness for everyone to see. Jesus now makes the point, he says, you don't light a lamp and put it under a basket. That's just goofy, you wouldn't do that. But on a light stand, it's ridiculous to think that you'd light a lamp and then I'm going to put it under something. You want to use it to light. You light a lamp so everybody can enjoy it. And again, and I think this is something maybe we miss in our culture today, that light is invasive. You can't keep light out. You really can't. I mean, if you think about it, think about, I don't know about you guys, I love a room darkening blind. I mean, I like my room to be dark when I sleep. But that when the sun starts to come up, it's coming in. Unless you have really got something to cover it over, you're going to get it, right? So again, I want you to think about it. If salt represents who we are, light represents why we are. If salt is what we do, the light is why we do it. So let me continue, because it'll kind of make sense. Notice though, and I mentioned it before, and I just want to say it, salt of the earth, but light of the world. World is really that idea of a created order. I said it's not a lot different. So it's kind of think about the earth as being kind of the material world, and the world as being the created order, if you will, because that's kind of the difference. So basically that God is a creator, right? He created everything. And add to this that Jesus called himself, don't miss this is really important. In John 9:5, Jesus said, I am the light of the world. And so you say, wait a minute, how does that work? Let's put it together. If our lives and our conduct can slow the rate of decay in the world, then we have to have something to replace the earthly focus on the stuff and the drama and all that. Said another way, when the world sees something different in us and they ask us about it, we better have an answer, right? Or in Peter wrote, that you should always be ready with a defense for why you have hope in your life. I mean, that was the idea there. And so, but because Jesus is the light of the world, we need to be reflectors of the light. We don't create the light, we reflect his light. Same thing. we just had, anybody get up last week and watch the lunar eclipse?
No.
Somebody did, who was
Oh,
that?
yeah, there was a couple, Donna Fraser.
Donna posted on Facebook that she got up, right, and watched
Yeah.
it. Well, we know that the moon produces no light, but the moon is a wonderful reflector of the sun's light. And in the same way, we reflect Jesus to other people. That means sharing the gospel, to help people get saved, to have peace with God the Creator, and to have a new purpose in their lives. But, and this is where you were kind of heading, and I've talked about this before, this is going to be a theme for me, just so I can say that out loud. I mentioned this maybe a week or two ago, that when I was coming up, churches either did service or they did evangelism. That's just what they did. You were either a church that went out and witnessed people, knocked on door, invited them to church, tried to get them to accept Jesus, and, do all that kind of thing. Either you did that, or you would, have clothing for the poor, and you'd have food, and you'd go out and do that. Both those are great. But I think one without the other is you're missing it. You're missing it. I mean, the reality is, and that video I showed you kind of pointed at that, but we need to be focused that, how may I serve you? Not with strings attached, but to say, how may I serve you, but realize where my service comes from. Does that make sense? In other words, to say, Jesus said, he talked about, giving a cup of water to someone. If you give a cup of water to the least of these, you're giving a cup of water to me. And so the idea is, if I saw somebody struggling, and to say, here, let me help you, whatever that is. And they say, why are you doing this? I'm doing it for you because Jesus did so much for me, right? To say, where does this come from? It comes from Jesus. And I think that's where the church in America has kind of lost its way a little bit. Because we're really good at doing good stuff, but we never tell them why we're doing the good thing. Right? We would still do it I hope, if you want to go out and you want to give people clothing or food or whatever like that, if they called you dirty names and told you to get lost, you'd still do it, right? So there's no strings attached. But to be able to have the message of why it matters. Because here's the deal, and James talks about this. You're not going to make a lot of headway with somebody if they're starving, or they're cold, or they're hurt, right? You got to take care of their physical needs first, because that's going to be the most important thing to them, right? I mean, if you're starving, you don't really want to hear a sermon.
Right.
Doesn't make a lot of sense. You got to take care of the person, their physical needs, so that their spirit can be open to hearing. Am I hitting on it?
No, I agree. But if you do it, it's great that you've done it, but if you don't do it in the name of Jesus, even if they don't ask you, if you don't tell them, it doesn't profit them.
No.
It profits them for the day, but not for eternity. And God doesn't look at that as being, and in our mind we think, well, that's a great thing. But God looks at it from a different way, the Bible tells us. So he doesn't look at it as being so great. He looks at it as being, dirty rags next to, unless we tell them that we're doing this in the name of Jesus. Why are you doing this? I'm not on my own account, because I'm not very good. I wouldn't really, but Jesus is telling me to do this for you, whether they ask you or not.
Yeah.
And that was the hardest thing on the mission field, because the needs were so overwhelming and so great, and you wanted to do everything and help people, and people would do it, but they wouldn't give them a gospel message. And if you don't give them a gospel message, you're not profiting them anything. You're not helping them.
That's one of the things that I really appreciate. Folks are familiar with Samaritan's Purse.
Sure.
Yeah. When the Samaritan's Purse sends out literally millions, tens of millions of shoeboxes every year around the world during the Christmas season. And they do a lot of things off season, by the way. They were literally the group that was boots on the ground in Asheville, North Carolina, because they're up in Boone. They were boots on the ground when Asheville got washed away by the floods. I mean, they were the people.
Yeah.
They were there before anybody to take care of those folks. I mean, they're 24/7. But when they send out, because churches all over probably the world now pack these shoe boxes to give to Samaritan's Purse to send to needy children all over the world around the Christmas season. But one of the vital parts, and I think it lays right on top, is a gospel presentation, right?
Absolutely.
Geared to kids. But yeah, I mean, there's a reason why you have this box in front of you,
Right.
and to your point. Yeah, because otherwise we're just doing it to feel good.
That's right. What's the problem?
Yeah, absolutely. So, but I think this isn't in the sermon really, but that's where we short circuit is, I think sometimes we get intimidated by the need. It's like there's this rush, and it's like you don't take time. It's like, well, the Lord's giving you the discernment. If there's a thing that's keeping you from doing that, figure out how to do it, but you got to tell people why you're doing what you're doing. That's why when we did our basketball ministry years ago, the kids came in, and we first thought, well, let's give them some snacks, just to, found out these were poor kids. And they were getting 2 and 3 snacks, and one of the ladies in our church said, "Do you think they're hungry?" And I said, "It seems like it." And before we knew it, we were feeding them meals, because they were starving, Can't really play basketball if you're starving. So, I mean, it just became this thing that, not surprisingly, took a life of its own, right? But every time we got those kids together at halftime, because we were together for 2 hours, at the midway point, we stopped. And we set them down around center court, and we presented the gospel message. And we felt like that was the most important part of the night,
Absolutely.
right? Number 2 was feeding them. Number 3 was letting them play basketball. So if they never bounced a ball, we felt like they needed to hear the gospel message. And so, yeah, otherwise, it was a waste. So I'm with you 100% on that, brother. So what's the point of our difference? What's the point of all of this? Jesus says it in 16. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. That's what Lee was getting at, right? If God is not glorified, it was a waste of time. And that goes in everything in our life. So 2 important concepts. Let your light so shine. Simply stated, people need to hear about Jesus. They need to know who leads our lives. I'm not advocating that every sentence and every word that comes out of your mouth needs to be evangelistic. But that needs to back what we do. And one of the easiest ways to do that is, and again, this isn't in my notes, but just some things I've learned along the way. We need to strike some words probably out of our language, like the word lucky doesn't work in a Christian's life, right? We are not lucky. We're led, we're blessed, but we're not lucky. So I've tried to, and if I hear you say it, I'm not going to, you shouldn't have done it. I'm not a speech police. But I personally have tried to not say good luck, right?
Yeah.
Because there's no luck in life.
I stay away from that
Do you?
too. I don't know why, but I
I was really convicted about that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because we work on a different plane,
Yeah.
right? So, you kind of got to let that kind of thing go. And there's other kind of careless little phrases that we use sometimes as believers that really, they don't apply to us in the same way, but that's one of the big ones. So kind of just think through that. And by the same token, I hear a lot of people when you're out and they'll say, I had a guy say this to me yesterday at a store we were at. He goes, have a blessed day. I like that. That kind of tells me they're probably a follower of Jesus Christ, but that can be, to a point where it's just kind of happenstance. So maybe, or not happenstance, but it's kind of habit. So maybe
Yes,
think
I
about what you
agree.
say. And from time to time, change it up a little bit so it stays fresh for what it's worth. But again, I just have this again as a theme. Much too much churches at a church level and believers at a more personal level focus too much on either the witnessing or the serving. And for me, where I want to be as a follower of Jesus Christ is to be both. To be able to serve people and to be able to tell them why I serve them. Now, let's bring it home. And I mean really bring it home. before we get to taking care of the homeless, before we get to taking care of the hungry, before we get to taking care of the orphan, folks, Jesus said that we were to go into Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. We live in Jerusalem. This is our Jerusalem. Del Val is our Jerusalem. And I think there's so many opportunities for us to speak hope into the lives of our neighbors or help them